Greetings and welcome back to the Casual Wargamer. Today I'm carrying on my editions videos, dealing with my experiences and thoughts on 3rd and 4th edition. If you saw my previous one, you'll know that I basically skipped 2nd edition, partly due to interested in other games and not having a player base. But at the beginning of the OOs, a friend of mine at the time was interested in getting back into 40k and asked if I was interested. Naturally, yeah. So we went over to our nearest Games Workshop store, which was Cambridge, and we jointly bought the 3rd edition core rules. He, wanting to play Black Legion, bought the Chaos Marine Codex and some models, and this was the first time I'd seen the Tau and Necron codices. And I decided to have a look at one of these, and I bought the Tau Codex. Didn't buy any models for it because, getting back into it, didn't want to jump into something. Ultimately, I decided that Tau wasn't for me. It was a little bit weird. I didn't really understand it. They weren't a part of 40k when I played, so I went back about a week later, bought the Space Marine Codex because, hey, I'm a Space Marine player, and some models. And where I say my friend was going Black Legion, I decided to create a custom chapter because the 3rd edition codex had rules similar to what we've had under the last couple of editions, where you could build a custom chapter by taking a couple of traits. And I came up with what I called the Sons of Osiris. They were a chapter that was based on a desert planet. There was like a Talan kind of desert people, natives, and they'd taken over a ancient alien Xenos pyramid structure under the sun. It's all very, very samey, usual sci-fi tat. And at the time, Games Workshop had this really cool colour that I liked, called Fire Dragon Crimson, which was this kind of weird sort of purpley burgundy sort of colour, and I painted a small force up with that. And I think my friend and I only played probably a half dozen games before he lost interest. Don't know why. And then without anybody else to play, I just sold mine off. 3rd edition, I would say, was a vast improvement over what I've read of 2nd. If you haven't seen the previous video, I did get my hands on the 2nd edition rules a few years ago and read through them and thought they were all absolutely awful. And 3rd edition is where I think you really see the basis of 40k as we know it now. The stats are there, the abilities, the weapons, and it's not weird like 2nd edition was. It's much more codified and quite a simple system. The artwork's a bit weird for 3rd edition, though, if I'm honest. It's kind of very exaggerated black and white art, or weird lines and hair and whatnot. It didn't grab me particularly. And the system was easy enough to get your head around. That we had some at least I had some enjoyable games. It's also the point where I think 40k gets its, or starts getting into the lore and the universe that we know now. It come a long way since Rogue Trader, which was when I played previously, and it had lost that kind of 2000 AD Judge Dredd style feel to it. It was now something a lot more, grimdark. So 3rd edition, not a lot of experience with it. Enjoyable system, not something I could go back to now, although I know a friend who does or has looked at just playing 3rd edition rules, but I don't think I could go back to something that simplistic. Sold my models and everything off, and a few years later we had a new game store in our town. Not our current one, this is an older one. And after a couple of years of that, the owner basically said he'd been contacted by Games Workshop. He was thinking of stocking their stuff. Would there be an interest? And pretty much everyone went, yeah, we'll play 40k. A few people wanted to play fantasy. but we got a good 10 or 12 people to start with, myself included, who just went, yes. And this was in the days of 4th edition. And 4th edition was a much better, more bulked out version of 3rd. Wasn't huge change, I don't remember, but it was a system that it really felt like they'd tweaked the rules, the mechanics. They'd bulked it up a little bit, just enough to make it a more playable experience. And naturally, I went back to Space Marines. Could never make my mind up, though. I went from, I think, Ultramarines to Silver Skulls to a couple of homebrew ones. Never really felt I could settle. And 4th edition had some issues. One of them was a balance issue. This was really the point where I can look back and go, I can really see that Games Workshop were specifically bolstering certain armies and making certain armies more powerful than others. Space Marines were atrocious, and they've been atrocious for editions now. Some of the rules in the game didn't help. In previous videos, I think I have spoken about Genestealers in 4th edition. 4th edition had a rule called Outflank, where a unit could come in on the sides of the table. You had to roll for it. 1 to 3 was the left, 4 to 6 was the right. 1 to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 was your choice. And my nephew played Tyranids, and he always overloaded his army with Genestealers. And Genestealers would literally outflank, come onto my side of the table, and just charge straight into my infantry, because you could come on and charge. And there was no Overwatch back then. And Genestealer, I think they were called Rending Claws back then, basically were AP3. If they hit and they wounded, Marines were dead. And there was nothing you could do about it. Monsters were ridiculously overpowered with AP3 attacks. There were certain rules and things like that that didn't really work, and I think had never really been thought out properly. But 4th edition was popular enough with my group that it took off and expanded. 4th edition was also the point where Forge World became not a thing, because I think they've been around in 3rd, but really became a thing and became a little bit of a problem, because we had players with Forge World models. And some people refused to play against them. And the reason was that back in the day, Forge World came up with their own rules, their own points costs for the units that they presented in their books. Imperial Armour, they were called. And if you've ever seen the likes of the Jane's Infantry Weapons of the World, which are these big, thick, chunky books which detail various tanks, vehicles, planes, guns that we have in the modern world, these were kind of like that for 40k, except they expanded the repertoire of armies and added new units, often quite big and powerful units that were extremely powerful and massively undercosted, which was the problem. Baneblades, for example, now we think nothing of individual models in a unit picking their targets. Back then, a unit had to pick one target and fired everything at it. Baneblades came along and they had a rule that basically went every weapon fires separately and can fire what it wants, and it would devastate armies. Now we don't think anything of it, and it's part and parcel. But back then, when there was no balance to it, it was an issue. So 4th had its issues, but I've got to say that it was an edition that got my friends and I playing again, and have been playing ever since. Through this, I was able to start up our own local club at the time, which has now been brought under the umbrella of our current game store. And we've had years now of nearly 20 years, I'd say, of playing 40k, and it all came about because the store wanted to do 40k and everybody got into 4th. And a lot of those players are still playing. Some of them, unfortunately, have stopped or dropped away or whatever. Life matters. And, well, yeah. But I would say that 4th edition was definitely the edition where the current universe, bar the changes from 8th onwards, were very much codified, and much like third had done to what had come before, fourth took upon that and built again. And it began to resemble more the universe that we know today. My only sort of grievance is that Games Workshop could have done better to balance games, but they used to have this, and I think still do, have this mindset that they're a miniatures company, not a games company, which is absolute BS. If that was the case, they wouldn't have a rule set. They just produce miniatures for you to use in whatever. They knew what they were doing. But this was a point, I think, before tournaments really became a big thing in 40k. But it still kind of really pushed people to play competitive. To be fair, what we play as competitive now looks far worse than anything we had back then. But I think this was the point just before tournaments became a major thing. And I think tournaments were one of the reasons why money obviously, but one of the reasons why they jumped to fifth and made the changes that went through fifth, sixth, seventh, and onwards. But yeah, fourth edition was a good edition if you were playing the right opponent with the right army. You could have a good time. Otherwise, I think a lot of armies got stomped by the likes of Chaos, Tyranids, and Eldar. That's my thoughts on those two editions. What are your thoughts from both those? If you played third or fourth, are your experiences the same as mine? You agree, disagree? Pop me in a comment down below. I'd love to hear about it. In the meantime, if you enjoyed the video, give me a thumbs up, please, and hit the subscribe button. Until next time, take care, guys. Good gaming.